For those of you watching and not here, we miss you. We hope you enjoy this little recording. This is going to help you focus on how to implement Statecraft IR simulation into your class this year and for future years to come. I want to let you know we are recording, so if you do want to turn your camera off, that's totally okay. If you want to change your name, that's totally okay. But this will be used for publications or promotional things, or just sharing with teachers who are like, what the heck's going on? Today, we are going to go over some updates on Statecraft. We're going to talk about what future workshops there are. We'll talk about what some of the questions were and expectations for this from y'all. We are going to create a fake world, and then we're going to sign up as a student too, so that you see how that process works if you haven't already. And we'll talk about the pros and cons to some of those options. Talk about how you get started in the classroom. Talk about it, adding it to your syllabus, and then building up throughout the semester. The one big question that we all have is that first day, how does it run? What are some things you could do? What are some things that might go wrong? How do we get around those things? And then what do you do as an instructor? So, that political advisor, how do you play that role in the classroom? Then I'll end with some supplemental materials, and we shall break for the day. Feel free to add stuff to the comments in the chat area, and I will be keeping track of that. Unmute yourself and ask a question if you want. I'm very open to this being a flowing dialogue as we go through it. So whatever works best for you. With that being said, I want to jump into, I should probably say, hi, I'm Stefan Pearls. I'm the high school simulation manager for Statecraft. I'm here to support you and your students and your admin and anybody else in that system to implementing this to make sure that engaging your students goes smoothly and awesomely, if that's a word. With that being said, updates, a little bit different from yesterday, but the main thing is that we've bolstered our backend security for students to make sure that there is no compromising of their data. They only enter their first, last name, and email, but that still is something that we have to make sure is on the lock. And so we do that. We did that this summer. One thing that we have going on right now is the back to school discount. If you sign up this week and you pay before September 1st, then it is an 8% discount. And I know, Craig, you're already jumping on that one pretty quickly. Way to go. The last thing is we have been testing this whole summer a new support input to the IR simulation that is AI based. So we've been testing it from our creator, from support staff, from sales, from backend, all of the questions that you might or your students might ask. And so at some point this fall, we're still waiting on what that deadline looks like. We'll be adding that so that students can just ask that rather than always emailing into support. So we want to make it as easy as possible to interact with the system. And that'll be something that we'll be working on over the next year for the US side. So I know that I didn't mention that yesterday, Craig, but the IR side, that is definitely something we're implementing this year. So those are updates for the IR side. For future workshops, as much as we get into today, we're going to do a little bit deeper dive throughout this fall and into the spring. We'll end in January with a panel of teachers and professors who've used the simulation for years in their classes. So it'll be a chance for you to ask questions, for us to kind of just pick their brains on alternative ways that we and they have found best practices with the sim. Then you get to play it. So we'll start the IR sim in February. It'll be a once a week thing, either Tuesday or Thursday. And then in March, I think it's late March, we'll do a US Gov sim on the opposite Tuesday or Thursday, so that you can play both if you'd like, but at least you get a chance to immerse yourself with other instructors in playing the sims. Like I mentioned earlier with y'all, like it's important for you to see that side of it and to experience it, to empathize with your students. And then that'll end the year. This is the first year we're doing workshops and trainings like this. And so as we go through, we hope to see you again. If you choose to, fantastic. Also, like, your input here today and throughout this semester will help guide us as to what those topics are and how deep we go into specific areas. So just keep that in mind. That is not a one-sided thing. It is I definitely want to make sure that your voices are heard. With that being said, we got some questions on the Zoom registration, and so I'll just read those out now. People haven't used this sim before, so I want to use a sim in a classroom. How does it work the first time for participants, students, and instructors? How do you do this with high school classes? Because yes, we work in grad classes and college classes and even middle school classes. What does this look like for high school classes? How to just plan out, get started, set up, and maintain the sim. So a lot of logistical and structural pieces that we'll go over today to help you feel confident in that. And note that our support staff is here 7 days a week. So if there's still something that you're like, I don't know what to do, that's okay. We got you. Expectations for today. Went over a little bit about making sure, throw those in the chat, those questions. If you do think that we're skipping over something or you want to take a pause and go back, that's okay. Feel free to throw that out there. First thing I want to do is set up a world with you. If you have your IR account already, feel free to open that one up and log in and do it alongside. If not, that's okay. This is recorded and you can come back to it. But I'm just going to walk through that setup. And then what I'll do is I'll walk through the student registration using that setup so that you see how that works. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Let me know if you can see it. Cool. Awesome. So on the right side, you'll see a bunch of different simulations over here. Once you have started one of those, they'll populate the top menu. We're on the IR sim. You can use the IR Lite, you can use Model UN. There's a bunch of other things in here, but we're just going to stick to the main IR sim. So what I want to do is click on that Setup New IR Sim. This will take us to school name, course name. I'm going to be making up a bunch of stuff here, so I'm going to do Statecraft High School, and the course will be Getting Started IR. Obviously, you put in whatever your class is for these. My simulation code. Now, this is the code that you're going to give your students. Craig, you've done this already a little bit. So having one in the spring, one in the fall, one in the next spring, it's really helpful to space out those based on the dates. So what I would recommend is something, a lot of times teachers will use their last name. So I'll use my last name for this one, Pearls_fall_23. That will be the code that students will need to input specifically when we have them register. So next step, students in my class, let's say we have 36. Now is a chance for us to determine, do we want students to take the foreign policy attitude test or the instructor assignment? Typically, it's a lot easier for you as the instructor to choose the foreign policy attitude test because then you don't have to do anything. Sometimes instructors want to, really have hands-on. What I will say is this, whether you choose the instructor assignment or the foreign policy attitude test, you can still change students around later on. So if you think that this person shouldn't be with this person, you can switch them before the sim starts. The benefit to the foreign policy attitude test, and I'll walk through those questions in a little bit, not all of them, especially if a student's watching this, will be that you get these students on a spectrum of hawkish to dovish. And then it groups those students in like-minded areas, polarizing that world. If it's a group that has a bunch of different beliefs in it, it'll make it harder to make the decisions internally, which makes it harder to make decisions in the world as a whole. That being said, groupthink is real, and it does put into a different context how this game comes to life when they are interacting with each other. If this is the way that I think it should work, and this other country thinks that this is the way it should work, there's going to be some opposing perspectives, trades, all those types of things, and it will come out in different forms, whether it be war or something along espionage realm. With that, we'll leave it at the foreign policy attitude test. You can leave Zoom in here, and you can also take it out. I'm going to just leave it in for today's purpose. Welcome, Sam. Good to see you. We'll leave this as Eastern time zone. I'm Pacific time, but doesn't matter where you are. The simulation will capture whatever your time zone is. All right, so when we're creating the schedule, and this is a big question a lot of teachers ask, at what point in the year Should my students know this? We're going to dive into that a little bit more. I would recommend not doing it at the very, very beginning of the school year. Let's put it a little bit later, maybe Monday, the 25th of September. I wanted to run 7 to 10 turns, so I'm going to do on the higher side. I'm going to put 10 in there. And then I want it to end on Sunday nights, so it's a full week. If it ends on Sunday night, there's a discrepancy of about 15 minutes, so I have to change the start time to a little bit later. So I'll change it to 4 a.m. You don't want to do it right when this class starts, because sometimes it takes a little while for all the decisions to go behind the scenes and produce the results for the next turn. So 4 a.m., 2 a.m., somewhere around there. Usually students are asleep by then. Not all the time, but sometimes they are. So if I look to the right, this is kind of what my schedule looks like. And I can change those based on a little cursor. I can drag, especially if I have a holiday coming up. I can, drag and drop a couple extra weeks and make sure that that holiday is in there. So once I'm comfortable with that, I will save it. I can change that later, just so that you know. Then it's payment options. If you're a school that requires the students pay for this, a lot of times it's college students are the ones that are paying for it. Sometimes there's middle school and private high schools that have their students pay for it. So that is an option to have them pay when they register. Other times it's the school that's paying for it. And I work directly with those people, as Craig and Sam have both found out before. Trying to make it as easy as possible on y'all. But the bureaucracy is sometimes there to help us make it a harder thing to accomplish. Once that happens, if you have done the organizational payment and you've already purchased and you're just signing up another class, just let me know and I'll make sure that it's active in our system. So now that we've done that, it'll say, yay, you've created your sim. Awesome, excellent. I'm going to take that specific sim code back in the main screen here, which for today's purpose was that Pearls_FA23. There's 2 parentheses. Don't include the parentheses when students are signing up. But I jumped into the IR webpage. Can y'all see this? Just want to make sure that it says student and professor. We're good? I'm not sure if that's coming up. Okay, cool. Awesome. So I'm going to click that student account. And that student account then brings me to the screen, and there's a not registered button there. So a student will click that, and then they'll submit that SIM code. Oops, should be Pearls_FA23, and then sign up. Now the school name and the class name will show up here, so they can confirm, all right, this is the right class. So if they typed it in wrong and it goes to a different class, that's not the class they should be signing up for, right? This is the right class. Awesome. I'm going to put my first name, last name, email, test@statecraftsims.com, and then, well, password. Hopefully I got all that right. The reason I'm doing this, I just want to show you that foreign policy attitude test. Oh, I have to acknowledge that the payment was processed. Give me 1 second. Of course, the technological barriers exist. While you're doing this, maybe think of what you want your SIM code to be for if you have one class or multiple classes, how those differ. Sometimes teachers like to make them fun. So it's just up to you how you want to do it. Okay. Back to student account. Back to not registered yet. Back to Pearls FA23 and signing up. All right, let's see if this one works. Great. Now we're into foreign policy attitude test. This is that spectrum, right? So your country needs to cooperate more with the United Nations in settling international disputes. I strongly agree with that. Let's say, for example, right? It is essential for your country to work with other nations to solve global problems such as overpopulation, hunger, and pollution. I'm neutral to that. As students go through this, they're going to think about their personal beliefs. So what that means is they're bringing their personal, I guess, leadership attributes to their specific countries, meaning their emotions are going to be intertwined with it as well. And I say that because emotions are a huge part of this sim. If you've used this sim already, you might have already seen it. If not, there might be a time when students are frustrated. There might be a time when students are angry with another group. There might be a time when students are super excited that they were able to create this treaty and get this big project or whatever. Those emotions then help them remember those experiences. And that is up to you to then help tie those back to the concepts that you're teaching in your class. So there's about 10 questions here. They'll go through that. Then when the system kicks them all in, it will take all of their responses and then group them into those countries. What we then see is on the instructor side is there's a world. It's divided the students into different countries. They all are divided between these, as it's loading here, colors of those countries. And they each have 3 cities. So this is where the sim starts for the students when they log in that first time. Let's take a second to pause on the map and everything like that. When are we getting students introduced to Statecraft? Day 1 of high school, day 1 of the school year, probably not the best place to do it. They don't have anything to grasp onto. Despite the fact that it's a game of sorts, it still needs to be connected back. So I'm going to throw this out there. Sam, I know you've used it. You've also played it. Do you have any recommendations as to where you feel like this would be a good place to start based on just a little bit of knowledge?
I teach AP, so I introduce it at the end of the year, right around the AP test. This year I plan to do turn 0 right before the AP test because it really doesn't take that long. But I also plan on trying to introduce it sometime later in the first semester just to see how it goes, like maybe around Thanksgiving time. We're going to give it kind of a practice try because there is a learning curve to it. And there's a certain amount of frustration from some students. Some students, they're gamers. This is familiar to them. They just jump right in. And some other students, they have no idea and they just kind of attach themselves to somebody who knows. But if I have enough time, I think I'm going to try to do it around Thanksgiving or Christmas after they've already had some content and something to tie it to.
Thanks, Sam. Those are really great points. And I'm going to piggyback off of you there. And maybe we can chat more about this. I think we did a little bit, but the IR Lite version is a simplified version, which introducing first gives them that, okay, comfortability. Here's how I click through the buttons. Here's how I go after some of the goals. And I'll go over the goals in a little bit with y'all. But having that as your base to then come back to, fantastic idea. I've seen that work really well in a lot of classes. It is a country building game. There are 2 levels. You have the domestic and the international levels. And so having a brief and general idea of how that works, whether it be European history or world history or human geography or comparative politics, a little bit of that knowledge of how that works can be very helpful in establishing. Just that being said, though, it doesn't mean that you should do it the last 2 weeks of the school year either, because there is a powerful piece of it being a capstone that you use throughout your course, anchoring experiences and helping students develop consistent concept connections. That's a powerful piece. I also say that with a bias because that's how I played it and that's how I remember learning international relations in college. That's how I took it from Dr. Keller, and so that's how he did it. So with that being said, maybe not the first month, but introducing IR Lite or even introducing IR after a little bit of concept building, depending upon the course you're teaching, is very helpful for those students. Any questions on when to start the sim?
Yeah, I had a quick question. I'm planning on starting it after fall break. I have a semester course, and I think that's a good time to run it. Yesterday in the U.S. government simulation, it was presented to run it for a number of weeks straight, with really the only focus in those weeks being the simulation. Last semester when I ran it, I'd do it and we'd work on it, one day specifically every week. Is it recommended to do that and kind of intersperse different content around the one day you do it a week, or something that's, more focused?
That's a really good question. We have seen the ways that this runs best is if you have a consistent day or days that you run it in class. Typically, it's 30 to 45 minutes per turn. And if you play the full IR sim, not the IR Lite, it's 7 to 10 turns. So if you're playing it for 7 to 10 turns, you could do it on a weekly basis, but then you can throttle the last few turns. So turn 0 is 1 week, turn 1 is 1 week, turn 2 is 1 week, then turn 3 is half a week, and turn 4 is the second half. And you start to speed it up a bit because students start to get the simulation better. So the decisions they're making become more of a muscle memory. And then adding into that the concepts that you're teaching in the class. So for example, what you're going to be teaching, was it world history, Craig?
This year it's international relations. I demoed it
Okay.
in the world history course, but we're
Cool.
introducing that international relations course as a semester junior senior elective this year.
Awesome. Okay, so let's say you're getting to the end, you're talking about realism versus idealism. Okay, by turn 4, you have a memo that you need to submit by the end of turn 4 that shows your connection in your brain to a specific spot in the sim where realism or idealism is showing up. Oh, and by the way, ChatGPT can't do that for the students. That's a very specific thing happening in the sim. And as they write that, or they record a video of that, and I'll go into memos later, that is their way of then saying, cool, this is my week's work, participation grade, or this is my connection to the class and performance of my written, memo. But as let's say your fall breaks, what, early November, or is it? I don't know when fall break is particularly.
Yeah, it's like we're quarters, so we break our semester up into 2 quarters. That breaks right in the middle of October.
Not middle of October. So you would have potentially 8 to 10 weeks. Probably 8 weeks, closer to 8 weeks in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see throttling that the last few weeks to have, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a couple to 3 weeks. And that really emphasizes more importance and value on it. And then you can then see what's happening on the instructor dashboard to then connect it back to, okay, we're seeing these areas that we've talked about before, or we haven't talked about before, connecting back to the classroom. I think there's a lot of roundabout answers to your question, but did I answer it?
Yeah, that's great. And that's a great thing that I think as we get more teachers involved in the community, good brainstorming and trial and error. So it's awesome.
Craig, do you have block schedule or traditional period?
Traditional.
So you're 45-minute classes at this point.
Yeah. Yes, if we do.
Yep. So have you thought about doing like a Monday class and a Thursday class as IR, or like how does that work for you?
As the simulation?
As a simulation, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I think last year when I tried it out with the sophomores, we did every Thursday, and that wasn't quite enough time for them to accomplish anything particular. I mean, they could accomplish some good stuff and meet together, but really start to implement those decisions. And then if you had an add-on extension like a discussion assignment or a memo, they didn't have enough time to get started on that and maybe ask questions, even if you were giving it more as a homework type piece rather than to do in class. So I think at least, I think what you're saying is what I'm going to do is right after fall break, we're going to kick it off, allocate about 8 weeks to even the 9 weeks I think we have in total. So I can be flexible and extend out some of those later ones if we need some more time during the weeks or whatever happens. And then do at least 2 days a week full time in the simulation. One really for, hey, this is turn 1, collaborate. And this is day 1, collaborate in this turn. This is day 2, execute and prepare kind of your follow-on connection to content, maybe a formative and maybe a summative assessment there.
Craig, I'm going to piggyback off that one too. Those are great ideas, especially having like a day that's focused. I'm going to bring in an idea from Steve Korpusik, who's used us 7 years now up in Detroit. He teaches AP comparative politics, and his themes that he would do was have a Thursday country meeting day and a Friday UN meeting. So he like really tried to say, you're going to focus on your country today and you can do your trades and whatever. But then Friday is like collective. We're going to talk about some of those bigger issues, those collective problems that are happening across the world. A reason for that was he found that not every class wanted to deal with the UN. And so if you put that aside, then it really becomes the competitive awards, which really amps up the aggression in a world. Sometimes, Sam, I know that happened to you last spring. You're like, my world's not, it's not aggressive enough. Like, I want to get it more, how do I get it more aggressive? Like, to like bring out some of these theories. And so there's a balance between that. And obviously every class is going to be different because the students in them are going to be on that spectrum way different than the last class. So kind of knowing what's going on in the sim is going to help you with that. And we'll be able to show you some more of those levers behind the scenes as the semester goes on and we jump into some other workshops. Jennifer, how are you feeling about this? Any questions? I know that you were nodding your head in a couple times there.
No, I feel like this is going to be a really good way to let the girls have hands-on. We use a magazine called The Week, and it has 2 pages called The World at a Glance, and it's got just short stories about what's going on in the world because it's a world history course. So, I mean, we're looking at the 1200s, which is dull. But if I show them what's going on in the world now, and then I do that throughout the whole year, then at the end of the year, they get a country and they have to do a whole assignment on that. But I think this is a way to make it less like book report kind of attitude and more like I get to actually make decisions in light of what I know about what's going on in the world around me. So I think it's gonna be cool.
Sweet. I can see before it's
I'm gonna make a suggestion with that because I teach AP Euro and Western Civ, but a lot of what I teach is going to be kind of changed in the next few years into a world history class. And a colleague of mine started doing a country project like you were describing, which I'm going to start implementing this year because it turned out really well the way he implemented it. And the way he did it was he started the project in January, and each group had a country and they became the expert in that country. And they sort of had to trace what was happening in this country, in this unit of study. And then they sort of, every unit, they'd have like news reports. And sometimes the news would focus in that particular week on, Italy. And sometimes the news would focus on Germany. And so you always had somebody who was somewhat of an expert in the room that could kind of fill in the blanks for the other students. But the other thing that is kind of nice about it is, and what I'd like to do this year with it is like, okay, so as one of the writing assignments, I have who is your country most similar to in history? Right. So describe the situation and describe, okay, what is it similar to in anything that we've studied, and describe why, or pick another country that somebody else is similar to. And it really helps them to make the connections. So just an idea. That
sounds awesome. Definitely a cool assignment to be able to like grasp your own country and
plus, by the way,
too.
Another reason that I want to move to that model, just kind of having a standing project, is that if you really need to, it's an easy sub plan. If you get into a jam, you can just say, okay, they have this project already in place, have them work on it for today or tomorrow, whatever. And it's not just like busy work or anything.
Yeah, I made them present the country and everything. I mean, like you said, like they have to be an expert in that country. But some kids dig in more than others. Some kids, just blow it off and then they turn in something that's bad score. But I feel like the IR simulation like forces them to engage.
They will be forced to engage for sure, especially when you add in that incentive of the grade. And there's a lot of different ways that teachers will grade the sim. Yesterday, I know, Craig, you saw how Scott Pangrazi grades his, and it's not about the points in the sim. It's more about the performance and the analysis of how their decisions were made. A lot of teachers will use that. A lot of teachers will use the points, but it can be like a little combination of the two that we've seen the teachers who've used us the longest do the best with it. So I'm going to go into the sim. I'm going to show you a little bit about what to expect turn 0. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the syllabus edition, the grading incentives, and so on and so forth with that. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again here. We are in the fake world that I've created. If you go up to the student list right here, you can sign into your students' accounts and see any of their messages. So if you ever are like, I know what you're going to be writing, like I can read it just so that you know. If you need to say that, you can do that. I haven't signed into anybody's here. No one is registered or signed in. These are all made up names. But I'm going to show you what happens the first time they sign in. So there's going to be a tutorial that pops up on their screen. Let's see if it does it from the instructor side. It may not from. Essentially what will happen is they'll have to click through a bunch. Oh, here it is. Here it's coming. Slow computer day. Here we go. This is the tutorial that will come up for them, and it walks them through what to do in turn 0. So the first thing is they need to choose their government type. There are 4 government types to choose from. They need to vote on their president, and they can select that from the people in their country. They need to choose 2 attributes, and they also, I'm going to make a recommendation based on what we heard a lot last year, could fill out a really helpful grading assignment. And I'll jump into it in a second. So they're going to go through all of this stuff. You're in the classroom. They're walking through their map. So that means that they have their own computers. They can use their phone to go through this stuff. So just as an expectation with technology. Let me jump back into our world here, just so that we're not getting confused. So in a student world, too many tabs open. It's going to force me to go back. I'm going to jump into a different one. Make this go faster, y'all. I'm going to jump into testing. Yeah, we'll go this one. Students. So there's specific goals that students are going to need to go after. And Sam, you may not have seen this last year. This is something that we chatted about as support staff this summer. There are grading awards. At the end of the sim, students will be graded based upon their placement in these grading awards. This is also a fake world, so these names are also fake. On the left-hand side, if I go down to grading awards, this shows all of the awards that they can get. There's 4 collective: ending world hunger, global peace, wiping out global terrorism, and save the planet. There's 1 final quality of life index. So as you work to support the domestic factions in your country, it's an average of all of the turns. If you get to the end and you have a 700 or higher, you get 12 points. That's really hard to get, but there are students who do it. Then you have your competitive awards: healthiest, safest, greatest poverty fighting, da. Sam, I know that you had an issue with getting students to be more aggressive, or at least do something more. So maybe they were more focused on some of these like more collective issues. Sometimes that happens. Was that the case for you?
Well, they were focused on getting the collective issues because I heavily weighted the global cooperation ones awards, which I still would do again. I think in the beginning, though, one of the mistakes that I made was when they chose the type of government, they didn't really have a clear understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of each type of government as it plays out in the sim.
Nice.
And I think if they had understood that, because they all just chose like like a constitutional monarchy. That's just, they just kind of defaulted to that.
Hmm.
And so they all had sort of similar strengths and weaknesses. And I think if I had kind of emphasized those options and explained it to them a little bit more, I would have ended up having some kids be a little bit more aggressive in the beginning.
And that's a good point. And I will touch on that looking at the appendix up next in coordination with this assignment that I think might help you. So if you, as Sam mentioned, you put a specific weight on each of these, there's already a weight in the system that will spit out a score. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to change that. If you want to emphasize one of these more than others, most cultured country, safest country, and say that's worth 20 points instead of 5, it really will shift the way that students interact. What I do recommend is the first time you try it, just leave it and just let it run to understand how it works. But it's up to you how you change that. So the reason I bring this up is because not every teacher does this, and we've noticed that. So if you start the simulation in turn 0 by having them do a grading awards assignment, their country name, student name and roles, and then which specific award they want to go after. I mean, they could choose all of them, but realistically, that's going to be nigh impossible. How will your government type help you achieve this award? I'll show you where that comes into connection on the sim. How will your country attributes help you achieve this award? In the sim itself, there's a section under documents on the left tab. It has course documents, and then it has this thing called the appendix. In the appendix, it goes through and describes a lot more about the regime, bonuses, penalties, and special abilities. So if students haven't read this, they're just picking at a win. So my recommendation would be have them read through this either before the sim starts or turn 0 day, so that they have a solid grasp of them as a team choosing the country regime type that they want and the attributes that they believe will be best for them. Then once they do that, again, attributes here and the benefits to those. Once they do that and they acknowledge that in their grading awards, they can then move on to this big project. Sam, I know that you know what big projects is. Jennifer, I don't know. Do you know anything about big projects? Totally fair. So most students won't either until they've read the manual, which there's a quiz, by the way, in there to help make sure that they're reinforcing that. Big projects are these, quite literally, big projects that you can gain that will tremendously help your country towards the strategy that it's trying to achieve. So I'm going to scroll back up here to the top and we're going to jump into, where are you at? Big projects. So these big projects can be triple, like Big Brother, triple effects of surveillance centers and doubles chances to catching foreign spies. The Globe of Frost prevents catastrophic melting of Ice Mountain. The Mayo Clinic triples effects of hospitals. So if you have your students go through this and identify which big projects they want to achieve, and then you have them say, here are all the resources, how will you plan on getting the resources for that? Because your country may not have that. Let's say Big Brother costs 400 of every resource and you have a lack of food. How do you plan on getting that food? Do you plan on trading? So what it's doing is they're not going to potentially follow that grading awards assignment. It just gets them to think through, oh, I have to actually plan ahead. I'm not just doing this for today. I'm doing this to like build a whole arsenal that will help me with my quality of life, that will help us get to those grading awards. Then the last two things here are technology that they need and the turn for those big projects. I'm going to jump right back into the appendix over here. There are trees for these technologies. So you can see the big projects and you can see if I get medicine, it'll take 1 turn. If I get advanced medicine, it'll take 1 turn. So each technology takes a number of turns to research in order to then have it in your arsenal. They can also be traded. So if there's a way to trade with someone else who may already be researching those things, in a pact that you have, an alliance, that could be helpful. These are all things that will help the student make the determining factor of what big projects they're going after, what trees they want to research and technologies. So this is part of that turn zero that could take a full class period for them to identify, or you could do something where like, we're going to start this now and it's a homework assignment that's done at the end of turn zero so that they've taken a full week to think about it. When they do start to research, they'll come under research, they'll set their priorities for whatever that specific big project that they're going after is, and then they'll start going after those technologies. So giving that a little bit more of a plan versus like, good luck, and then by turn 3 they're like, I wish I had known this, which still can happen. Hopefully that'll help a little bit. Sam, is that something you think might help for you?
Yeah, I think so. Did you have that before, that like assignment worksheet? I think that might help a little bit. It depends on how quickly they can work through that. But they just, the thing about it is the way it was structured in the past is they just had to read the manual and they were expected to understand the manual before they went ahead. But I teach sophomores, and sophomores in high school don't think that way. And what happens is they come to a point where they just can't figure it out, and then they go to the manual to try and figure it out. And this is a little bit more proactive in that regard, and they'll still think in that way, but you really have to lead them by the hand and say, okay, this is what you have to look at first.
Mm-hmm.
You look at your trades, look at your research priorities, figure out what you want to do. And then I think by turn 1, I say, okay, now look at your cities, look at the structures that you have and what you don't have and what you can and cannot get. And then if you start giving it to them in bite-sized pieces, then it makes a little bit more sense to them. And I think that worksheet will help a little bit.
Great. And I think also with your IR light in the fall, that's that test run. That'll be like, okay, now I got it. I'm excited for the spring. Let's do this. So I think I can see that now. The IR light doesn't have big projects, but it'll still help get them in that mindset. In terms of grading, I want to throw out there this idea around quality of life. Dr. Marianne Gallagher mentioned this in an interview I had with her this past spring. She's used it for almost 10 years. Her idea was, well, what if quality of life were an actual grade in the class versus like 12 points or whatever is like part of the bonus? So what she does is she says quality of life is 5 points of your final grade, which means you have to invest in your domestic factions. And so if you get more than the 12 points in the sim, then you can get bonus points. She does like a whole thing around that, but she says 5 points is devoted specifically to quality of life. That for her has shifted the way that her students engage in trading with one another. It doesn't mean that there's no war in the sim, but it does mean that they're heavily focused on their domestic factions, which for a military dictatorship that is industrially focused, they're really not going to care much about what their people are doing. In fact, they're going to let them, migrate to other countries. They're going to have real poor environmental state. Like it's going to be a bad place for their citizens, but then they don't do well on that. So that's just a little tidbit of advice that I'll pass on from Dr. Gallagher on that one. In terms of other grading, there's a few things, and I know that we're getting close to finishing up here. It is important to find ways that are not the sim points to add up to other things in the class. You can integrate this to where 50% of your grade in the class is tied to IR, but it should not be 50% based on the performance in the sim. In fact, the sim performance should only be about 5% as well. That, for a lot of students who want to do well, great, they have that. But if that's their way of doing well, how are you connecting it back to the class? And that's where memos come in. That's where the debriefing presentation comes in. That's where a presidential weekly State of the Union can come in. There's a lot of different things that you can create in your classroom that tie this back to your concepts that will allow them to say, all right, I need to prep this speech. I need to prep this presentation. there's a UN meeting coming up. Like, I haven't given a speech at the UN meeting. Maybe that's something, right? So finding other ways to then help students reinforce those concepts is really paramount versus that performance in the sim. And I'm doing that consciously because we have had a professor put 50% of the grade associated with the sim performance, and he's like, it didn't work. And it was like, no, it didn't work. Like, you're making it very unfair for the students. Okay. With that being said, there's only a couple other things left here that I want to touch on, and that is how the rest of the sim works out, and then what you can do as the instructor. So turn 0, turn 1, 2, and 3 all have a tutorial at the beginning that students can click through. Highly encourage they click through it. The ones who do will typically do better just because there's more information in there, and it's a little bit more contextual than just the manual itself. Is there reading? Yes, there's reading. That is part of it. You have to be able to grasp the concepts. As that moves faster, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, there's no more tutorials and there's less guidance in that respect. But that doesn't mean that there's not a help button that students can click through. Then there's the support team 7 days a week. And then Sam, I think you missed this in the beginning, we're adding in an AI chat function that will be helping students like get that real-time answer. And so that'll come out some point this school year, hopefully in the fall. Yeah. With that little tidbit, you are a political advisor. You are not the one to determine their decisions for them. You're the advisor. And so what that gives you is a chance to kind of sit back and let them come to you with their questions. And Sam and Craig, since you've implemented this a little already, you've seen that play out. I'm going to bring Steve Korpuzik's thoughts back in here. He loves sitting there and asking the why. Like, why are you making this decision? What can you see in real world scenarios that we've been learning about that helps you think that this is the right decision? And allowing those students to process that is extremely helpful versus being like, have you thought about, just investing all of your resources in your welfare program? I think you should do that. That guidance is potentially, a chance for them to then blame it on you. I didn't do well in the sim because of you, and now my grade suffers because of that. That's understandable. So I encourage you to really take a step back. There are a lot of controls you do have behind the scenes, and again, we'll go into that more this semester, but there are some levers that you can pull throughout this sim. I know, Sam, you tried it out in the spring. How do we get there to be more confrontation? How do we lessen the confrontation? I don't want there to be nuclear war. Like, that might be too much, right? Having a conversation with the support on Statecraft. We had a team last year that was really worried about that, and they ended up pulling an audible and doing something completely different, and they were really happy with their decision. But we had a 30-minute discussion about what they think is the best approach. We think we have answers because we've seen hundreds of teachers use this, but that doesn't mean it's always the right answer. And at the end of the day, you're the expert of your class. So I want that to be also something to keep in perspective as well. 2 last things to end with before I put up a poll. We have 5 minutes left here. I'm going to share my screen. If you have yet to look through our website, I think, Sam, you've checked this out before. We have a whole page that connects 5 AP classes to the standards of those classes to what's going on in the simulation. And so, for example, let's use AP Human Geography. If you see the AP alignment, there's 2 different spreadsheets that you can choose from here. And I have them pulled up, and they're probably going to take, oh, there they are. So we go through all the AP stuff and say, this is how this specific standard lines up. Here's the concepts and the qualitative piece to that. It's a 10 out of 10 match or an 8 out of 10 match. So if you're curious about that for how your class might function, whether you teach AP Human Geography or a regular geography course or a world history course, this might be a good place just to gain some just alternative thoughts and concepts. Additionally, there are 2 pieces within the class implementation. Down here, there's memos and debrief presentation. And so I pulled those up. A memo, you can literally pull this and use this if you want, or you can create your own. By the end of each period, students can submit a memo about one of these questions and seeing how it lines up to the sim. If this is your class and you want to be able just to have this running in the background to be like, don't forget your memos due this week. It's part of your participation. It's 2% of your grade every week. That's an easy thing to kind of push through. Dr. Keller, the guy who created this year, did group memos that were recorded videos. And so he had the students either sit together or record individually and submit those, which was interesting to watch. I got to see them, and especially as you see a country develop over the semester, it's cool to see how they change and they adapt. The last thing is the debrief presentation. I don't know, Sam, did you do this last year by chance?
Sort of.
Okay.
Like a kind of a modified version of it.
And modify away by all means.
Yeah.
It is important to solidify that experience, especially when you don't know the other country's decisions and rationales for those decisions. If you thought a country was completely irrational and then they start talking about their decisions, you're like, oh my God, you were totally rational the entire time. I just
Yeah.
didn't have all the information. I should have been spying on you with my espionage spies, right? Like, there's a lot of things that will come out of that that will help solidify some of the concepts that students have. And then you can take that to the next level, and having a student finish that with the year with a paper about concepts they're learning in the class and tying them into the sim, whether it be pulling from their weekly memos or creating a new paper based on a different concept. So hopefully those will be helpful. They're in the dashboard, I should say, for the instructor. Come back to the main dashboard. If you scroll down to the bottom of that, those should be there. I'm going to try and add the grading awards this week. If not, I'll just send that out here. But all the other stuff is down here at the bottom of that. With that being said, I think that's it on my end.